Welcome back to End Times Enlightenment, everybody. We are in the studio of Brother Andrew Sluder here. He's a pastor in Asheville, North Carolina, and he's writing some books. He's written a book on Calvinism. He's written a book on divorce and remarriage, and he's writing a book on the end times. And today we're going to be talking about the manuscript Sinaiticus and Vaticanus and the corrupt line of manuscripts that comes out of Alexandria, Egypt. And so thank you for joining us, Brother Sluder, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, a pastor Bible Baptist Church here in Asheville. I've written 3 books, like you said, one on Calvinism, one on divorce, one on doubting your salvation. I'm currently writing like 2 or 3 right now at the same time. I need to decide which one I'm going to finish up. But
finish the end times one.
Yeah, finish the eschatology one. That's what I'm trying to do. And so I've been pastoring Bible for a little over 11 years now. So we started it in the living room. And so that's pretty much it. I coach basketball, so that's my biggest hobby right now that causes a lot of stress and enjoyment.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm glad to be part of the podcast today. I'm glad we could do it.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. And you've also done a lot of research on Sinaiticus and Vaticanus and manuscript evidence you're very fluent in.
I don't know if I'd say fluent. I know enough to be dangerous. I know enough to make a lot of people mad. So
it's exactly what we're looking for.
Yeah. So I've done a lot of research. Of course, not done as much as other guys, right? Which I'm sure that'll come over time. I've not had as long to study as some of the other guys, but I have done a lot of research, a lot of looking into stuff. I've done presentations, done King James Bible conferences, and I've not done as much work on Sinaiticus as I have on Vaticanus. Now, what we have here is a Codex Sinaiticus. I wish I had a Codex Vaticanus, but I have to wait for you to write me a check to afford one of those. Those are pricey. Anything with the Vatican is going to be expensive, right? I mean, you can't even light a candle without giving a $5, in their churches. But I've done more so on the Vaticanus than I have Sinaiticus.
Okay, and you believe that Sinaiticus is, in fact, a forgery?
Yeah.
Now, is that a forgery of Vaticanus, or is that a forgery of something else?
So I'm hesitant to say that. So when we say forgery, it's kind of like, what do we mean by forgery? So let's kind of define it, right? When we say forgery, are we talking about like it is a fake? Well, then yes. No matter when it was made, no matter when it was done, we think that the Alexandrian line are falsehoods, are fakes, are corruptions, counterfeits of the Word of God, right? Regardless if they were done in 325 to 360 and 450 and before, no matter because you have Alexandrinus and Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. So even if they were done then, or if they were done as late as 1844, and the subsequent years right before they were discovered. I think 1844 is the discovery date. So regardless of when they were done, I think they're forgeries. The question arises of the famous Schofield note, right? The oldest and best manuscripts. That's the oldest and best. You hear that all the time. The oldest and the best. The oldest and best. That's the question of what we're asking today. And this is like in overlooking the evidence, what I've studied for the past couple of years and what other people have come out with. The question is not in our minds, because we're King James Bible guys, right? The question is not in our minds, are they fakes? They are, regardless of when they were done. The question comes down to what we really want to get down to the brass tacks of. When were they done? What's the evidence of where they came from? Who did them? When were they done? And I think personally, and I'm not dogmatic about this, right? Because it doesn't matter if it came out and there was like somebody said, here is concrete evidence that it was done in the 300s. I'd be like, okay, well then they were corrupting the Word of God in 300.
They were corrupting the Word of God in Paul's day.
Exactly.
I mean, that's recorded in the Bible.
Exactly. It's in. I always get it confused. 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians. I can't remember, but he's like, we're not as many which corrupt the
Word of God.
Yeah.
And of course, all your new versions then corrupt that verse and say we are not as many that peddle the Word of God.
Yeah.
Whatever that means.
Yeah, which they do because they peddle it. They peddle it because they want to sell it, right? They got a copyright on it. They peddle the Word of God.
And corrupt versions sell more than this one does. So then, that would make sense.
Yeah. And that's the key word, that it sells more. But this one is still that. I mean, you get all the missionaries and the King James publications that are printing them for free. Those are Bibles being printed that aren't even going into the sales tracker, right? So it's amazing how the own Bibles, when they try to corrupt the Word of God, They end up still, marking themselves. But they were doing it all the way back in Paul's day, like you said. And so regardless of when it was done, it's still a corruption. But I think the evidence, all that to say this, I think the evidence points to Vaticanus and Sinaiticus potentially being done much later than the dates that are put on them by the scholars.
Which the scholars say 325 to 360 AD, roughly within that time frame for both of those.
Yeah, and you'll find, I mean, it depends on who you're reading after, who's being quoted. The dates kind of vary on that. But yeah, in the 4th century, they're both considered 4th century manuscripts. So, and with that being said, there's a lot of, different books have been written about it in recent years. But I think a lot of emphasis has been put on the Sinaiticus. A lot of emphasis has been put on why Sinaiticus is a forgery. So these are 2 books that have been written. Now, before I go any further, always the disclaimer, right? When you're looking at a true Bible believer's library, we don't live in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
So anybody that's worth their weight in salt is gonna have some stuff where it's like, okay, this guy had some good stuff, but here's the caveat.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Chew up the meat, spit out the bones. You're not
Yeah.
going to agree with everything, and you can learn stuff from other.
Exactly. I don't agree with myself all the time. So, but David Swordson, who is going to be more of a TR guy. I say more of a TR. He's a TR guy. He wrote a book, though, Neither Oldest Nor Best. And it's how the foundational manuscripts of modern Bible translations are fraudulent. It's got some good information here. I don't agree with everything he says. I don't agree with all some of his conclusions that he wrote in there. I'll let the reader understand and decide. But this is a good book that's got some really good information about Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. It's more Sinaiticus based, though. It's more focused on the Sinaiticus. And then David Daniels, I have a love-hate relationship with David Daniels because
you know him personally?
No, not personally. No, I've had a few interactions with him online. He's seems like one of the nicest people on planet Earth. No, I'm talking about with his writing. Some of his books I read and I'm like, eh. And then some of his books, I can't put it down. I could not put this book down. This was almost written like a novel. It was great. This is called Is the World's Oldest Bible a Fake? And this was really, really good. This was one of David Daniels' best books. Now, he's written some sequels to this that are like, who faked the world's oldest Bible and all that kind of stuff. So I've not read any of those. I've just read this one. And this one focuses a lot on Sinaiticus, and it goes into the whole Simonides and the forgery that went with that, and how some of the pages might be he might have aged some of the pages with like coffee and stuff. It goes on a lot of. If you're like into conspiracy theory, which a lot of us,
we're King James Bible believers.
Of course, we're Bible believers. So of course we are
with conspiracy theorists.
Exactly. So those are 2 books that are really good. But I think, me personally, I think that they both focus on Sinaiticus a lot more than Vaticanus. And I think, though, that is almost a detriment.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier. So you
Exactly.
believe that Vaticanus is, in fact, more dangerous than Sinaiticus?
Yeah, and here's why. And I also think there's a lot more evidence for Vaticanus being forged than there is Sinaiticus. And the Vaticanus has a lot more kind of dark, heck, the word Vaticanus means the Book of the Vatican. So, of course, it's going to have some dark connotations, right? Because the Vatican. But yeah.
Latin, African, Roman Catholic book.
Exactly. So the reason why I think that the Vaticanus is more of an important one to focus on is, first of all, the Vaticanus, because Sinaiticus got all the attention, right? 1844 and Constantine von Tischendorf and the discovery and all that kind of stuff, and then Westcott and Hort just a few years later. So that's what got all the fanfare, right? These manuscripts being discovered, and oh my gosh. The thing is, though, is the modern Bibles are based 8% off Codex Sinaiticus. 8%. 2% off of eclectic texts like, Washington, I always mispronounce this, and somebody on the internet's going to rip me apart for it. Washingtonius, or however you say it. Alexandrinus.
Yeah.
So it's based upon, but 90%, around 90% of modern Bibles, their textual choices are based off of Vaticanus. Okay, so it seems like to me that's the big one. The Vatican having control of the modern Bibles. So when you begin to really examine the Vaticanus and the manuscript, it's horrible. It really is. So that's kind of the basis of where I think the Vaticanus is really, it's more important to focus on it than anything, because of just how influential it is with the modern Bibles.
So let's go a little bit more in depth on why you think that Vaticanus is more important than Sinaiticus and why you believe that it's a fake and the evidence for that.
Yeah. So like I said, it does account for 90% of the textual readings in the modern translations. And then why I believe that it's a fake, there's a plethora of reasons, and some of these have been really well documented in other books. So let's just kind of break it down. So first of all, Vaticanus, or as sometimes you might see it called Codex B.
Codex B, yeah.
Was cataloged. The first reference we have to it, the first time it's ever referenced, is in 1475, and it pops up in a catalog of the Vatican Library. Okay, so we don't know where it came from before that. We have no what's called provenance. All right, and I've heard that word pronounced. I may be pronouncing it wrong. I've heard it pronounced, all sorts of ways. Whatever. But so it has no provenance. We don't know which hands it came through. Now, some Bible believers will grasp onto that and say, well, see, we don't know where it came from. And these manuscripts, we can't trace them. Well, that can sometimes be a weak argument, because there are other manuscripts that pop up that we know are, relatively authentic. I say relatively because, who knows exactly? There's always new evidence coming out. But there are manuscripts that we have that we're like, we don't know exactly which hands it came through.
So that argument could be turned around on us.
Exactly. Yeah. So, but it is interesting. The first time we ever find it being mentioned is in a catalog of the Vatican Library, 1475. Okay, it wasn't quote unquote discovered until 1481. So that's kind of when it became known that, hey, there's this manuscript here. I mean, this is a big book, right? I mean, Codex. Codex is just like means book. It is a huge book. Okay. And it was alleged that it was written in the 4th century. That's the big argument that's made. All right. Now, here's what's interesting, though, now this is a Codex Sinaiticus, so I'm probably going to do that out of habit. Just, this is Sinaiticus. So in case the internet trolls are out there, he's pointing at Sinaiticus and, whatever. But the Vaticanus has 759 pages, 3 columns per page. That's very important to remember. Okay. It has 3 columns per page. And it's written on vellum or animal skins. All right. So the Vaticanus it was an expensive book. Okay. Whoever put it together, it was expensive. It's all vellum. It's all animal skins. 3 columns. The Codex Sinaiticus here has 4 columns. So I'm sure that they can't see this from there. Maybe Dan can put a picture up of it or whatever if we can, or focus in on it here. But Sinaiticus has 4 columns. Vaticanus was 3 columns, okay? So that's important to remember about the 3 columns there, because it actually plays an important role. We'll look at something in the Sinaiticus here in a minute as well.
Now, what was Sinaiticus written on? Was this papyrus, parchment?
Good night. I know the answer to this. It's in my notes on Sinaiticus. I don't have my notes on Sinaiticus. I think it was also on vellum.
Also on
It
vellum.
may have been parchment. Of course, I mentioned that the Vaticanus means the Book of the Vatican, which should be a red flag to any Bible believer.
Should be a red flag to any non-Bible believer as well that believes that the Roman Catholic Church is a heretical church.
Right.
I mean, it should be a red flag to anybody in my mind.
Absolutely. I mean, Protestants, their claim to fame is we protested the Catholic Church. Well, you don't protest their Bible. That's anyway. There's all the stuff you get into.
That's another rabbit trail.
Yeah. Here's the problems with the Vaticanus. Okay, so the Vaticanus is missing Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 all the way to Genesis chapter 46 verse 28. So pretty much all except for the last 4.5 chapters of Genesis is missing.
So that's all the way from creation all the way halfway through the story of Joseph, which is basically everything.
Right. Exactly. It's missing. So it's missing Psalms 106 to Psalm 138. It's missing Matthew chapter 16, verses 2 and 3, missing Matthew 16:24, Romans 16:24, It's missing all the pastoral epistles. It is missing Hebrews 9:15 through Hebrews 9:13-25, and it's missing everything up through Revelation as well. And that's what a lot of people don't realize about Vaticanus is everything past Hebrews 9:15 is basically written in a different, you have what's called uncial, which is, the capitalized, and everything written after that is
cursive.
Yeah.
Yeah, the lowercase
The
ones.
lowercase.
Okay.
So, that should be a red flag right there.
For sure.
Okay.
Is it missing John chapter 8, verses 1 through 11? Because I know a lot of the new versions are. Now, does Vaticanus take out that whole portion,
Yes.
which is the woman taken in adultery?
Yeah, and yes, it does, and we'll talk about that.
Awesome.
Yeah. Now, it's not just what Vaticanus takes away, but it's also what it adds. All right, Vaticanus has the Epistle of Barnabas in there, and it has the Apocrypha. And this is what I tell people.
Is the Epistle of Barnabas included in the Apocrypha, or is that something outside of it?
No, it's a deuterocanonical book, right? I think it's part of the pseudepigraphia, which is, those go back all the way to the 200 BC. So I do think obviously the Epistle of Barnabas was written after Christ, right? But I think it's just a fake writing. I don't think Barnabas ever wrote an epistle named the Epistle of Barnabas. Obviously, I don't think it's part of Scripture. But it's a deuterocanonical book that's not part of the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha are those, 13, 14 books that we were talking about in the Roman Catholic Church, takes as doctrine, canon, which is interesting, though, because they did not officially recognize it as canon until the Council of Trent in response to the Protestant Reformation.
The Council of Trent was, I want to say, 315.
No, 1547.
Okay, I must be thinking a different council.
You're thinking of Council of Nicaea.
Okay.
Which a lot of people, which is 325 AD, Constantine, which a lot of people think the canon of Scripture was established at the Council of Nicaea by the Catholic Church in 325 AD. But the Council of Nicaea never even discusses the canon of Scripture. It's not even brought up. We have what they talked about, and the canon was never talked about. The Catholic Church doesn't officially recognize the apocryphal books as Scripture until 1547. 1547, which seems like a long time ago, but in the flow of church history, that's a long time.
That's only 500 years ago. That's
exactly
1,500 years after the death and burial of Jesus Christ.
Exactly. So the Council of Trent is where the Catholic Church recognized the Apocrypha. And this is what I tell people. This is why the Catholics love Sinaiticus and love Vaticanus. And they want them to be authentic. They want them to be the oldest. They want them to be the best because they both contain the Apocrypha. That's all there is to it. And when we talk about the Apocrypha and the Septuagint and all that kind of stuff, and I have a whole thing we do about with the Septuagint. When we're talking about these apocryphal books, they're coming from these manuscripts. That's where we're getting the translations from, is from these manuscripts. So that's why the Catholic Church loves them. Okay, so it's not just what it takes away; it's what it adds. All right, the Vatican. Now, here's what's interesting: the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus, the two pillars of modern translations, differ in over 3,000 places in the Gospels alone. The Gospels.
That's not often brought up.
Yeah, the Gospels alone, they differ in 3,000 places. In fact, Dean Burgon, who was a brilliant man, he was more of a TR guy, obviously. He's not going to be exactly us, but Dean Burgon was a contemporary of Westcott and Hort, and he wrote several books. He wrote, and again, I'm not going to try to take time to dig through. You're closer to it than I am. Right here, see Errors in the King James Bible by Doc.
Yeah.
No, the one right beside, the one right beside the last 12 verses of Mark.
This one right here.
That one right there, because we're going to talk about this. I'm trying to see if I had another. I know I've got another one by him. Anyway, this is the big one though. He wrote this book about the last 12 verses of Mark, because that's a big controversy. We'll talk about that in a minute. But Dean Burgon said, it is in fact easier to find two consecutive verses in which these two manuscripts differ, the one from the other, than two consecutive verses in which they entirely agree. So that's a heavy statement when you're thinking about what's being said. It's easier to find two consecutive verses where they disagree than it is to find two verses where they do agree. So, interesting stuff there. Now, here's another thing about Vaticanus. This is why I think that it's so important to focus more on Vaticanus than it is Sinaiticus. Because, like I said, Sinaiticus got all the fanfare. Sinaiticus got all the, oh my gosh. Sinaiticus is kind of what jump-started this movement of the modern translations, right? 1844.
Yeah,
and
the
then,
RB committee, West
yeah,
Concord,
and
all
then
that stuff.
1881 and 1885. So you're talking about just a couple of decades later, you have this stuff going on after the discovery of Sinaiticus. This is where I think that we have to focus more on Vaticanus, and where the devil doesn't want the attention on Vaticanus. Yeah, I mean, he doesn't want it on Sinaiticus either, but if there's one or the other, I think the devil may want it on Sinaiticus. Because we act like, it's like these manuscripts were discovered in the 1800s. Oh my gosh, look at these manuscripts. We have all this information now. Let's start making Bibles. Like, look at how enlightened we are. Look, oh my gosh, the problem is that, like I said earlier, Vaticanus was discovered, cataloged 1475, discovered 1481. Erasmus, who correlated the Greek New Testament in 1516, what would later be called in 1633 by the Elzevir brothers, the Textus Receptus, the received text. Erasmus knew about these readings. He knew about Vaticanus, and he rejected them. Erasmus rejected the Vaticanus in 1533 when he was sent 365 variant readings from Bombasius. So a colleague of Erasmus, Bombasius, went to Vatican and said, hey, here's these readings. Sent him to Erasmus. He was like, I don't like them. They're not good. He knew about them and rejected them. The King James translators would have known about these variants.
Exactly. So for everybody else out there listening, that's the common myth, is that the King James translators did not have access to the oldest and the best so-called manuscripts. They didn't have access. They didn't know about them. And that's why they translated things the way they did, because they didn't know about the Enlightenment that we supposedly have today.
Right. They wouldn't have known about Sinaiticus, but absolutely Vaticanus.
Absolutely Vaticanus.
So, and that's one of the big, and again, so you're kind of seeing the picture now of like, hey, this is why I think the devil wants us to focus on Sinaiticus. So anyway, listen to what Sir Frederick Nolan said. He said this. He said, it is indisputable that he, referring to Erasmus, was acquainted with every variety which is known to us, having distributed them into two principal classes, one of which corresponds with the Culpeltian edition, the other with the Vatican manuscript. So Sir Frederick Nolan said that Erasmus knew about all these things that we have today, and he put them in two classes. Well, that's just like what Bible believers do. The two lines of manuscripts, the two families of manuscripts, Alexandrian verse, Antioch. It's so, quote unquote, Ruckmanites didn't invent that. I know that's the common battle cry.
Myth,
yeah. All right. So that means the King James translators would have known about virtually all of them, all the textual manuscripts. Now, here's where it gets interesting. So here's kind of the big ones, and this is where a lot of stuff has been written about it. Dean Burgon wrote some stuff about the last 12 verses of Mark. It's just incredible. If you have, take your pick. Pick me one of the modern translations. This shelf and this shelf are all my modern translations. You can do an NIV. That's always a good one to do. Just pick one.
Let's see. Let's pick New World Translation.
New World Translation, the Jehovah's Witness Bible. So let's dive into like the actual nitty-gritty of what's wrong with the Vaticanus and what's wrong with Sinaiticus, specifically Vaticanus we're talking about right now. If you go to Mark chapter 16.
All right.
Look here at Mark 16 in the New World Translation.
Yeah, let's compare these.
So just look at verse 8. Okay, see it there? Now go to verse 9. Yep. Oh, wait.
It's gone. There is no verse 9.
Yeah. So
King James goes from Mark 16, obviously verse 1, all the way to verse 20. And New World Translation has verse 8 is the last verse. So
it literally stops.
Half the chapter.
Yeah, it doesn't even put it. The New World Translation doesn't even put Mark 16 verses 9 through 20 in there. Doesn't even include it. Now, in your ESV, NIV, all that kind of stuff, they are not going to leave it out. But there should be a little note right above Mark 16, verse number 9 in the ESV there.
Yeah.
Go ahead and read that.
All right. So this is Mark 16, right after verse 8 and before verse 9. It says, some of the earliest manuscripts do not include chapter 16, verses 9 through 20. Let me just read you verse 8 real quick so you guys realize that this literally leaves you on a cliffhanger. Start in verse 6. And he said to them, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. Verse 7, but go tell his disciples and Peter that he's going before you to Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. And they went out and fled from the tomb, for trembling and astonishment had seized them. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. That's the end of the book, guys.
Yeah. The Amplified has it in brackets here, has the whole last 12 verses in brackets, and it says, the note on it says, later manuscripts add verse 9 through 20. So there's over and over, and I wish I had my NIV, because in an NIV, it literally has like the whole thing blocked. Like it's like this huge, obvious block, and it's like the oldest manuscripts don't support these, and it's like this whole thing, right? So the last 12 verses of Mark. So let me just go into some of the evidence here, first of all, for the last 12 verses of Mark.
Yeah.
The last 12 verses of Mark are quoted. In fact, James White himself, don't ask me for the video, but it's somewhere online, somewhere, one of James White's videos. He said that out of all the textual readings, there's probably more evidence for the last 12 verses of Mark actually being part of the original text than any of the other variants, okay? Don't ask me for it where that's at. I heard him say it with my own ears, all right, on a video somewhere. But you have quotes from the last 12 verses of Mark all the way back to like Irenaeus.
Yeah, some of the early church fathers.
Early. So, or as Martin Luther called them, the early church babies. But anyway, so you have Irenaeus. I mean, you got early stuff quoting the last 12 verses of Mark. Okay, not only that, but one of the biggest arguments against the last 12 verses of Mark, and it's wild. It's why we're even talking about this. This week, I had a guy say, well, aren't there some really weird doctrines in the last 12? He was asking me about the King James issue, and he said, aren't there some really weird doctrines that arise if you take the King James text? I'm like, well, it depends on what you mean. Yeah, maybe.
If you mean go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, Mark 16:15.
Well, the thing he brought up was if they shall drink any deadly thing, it shall not hurt them, and they take it up serpents. And I've heard James White himself mention these things about, Mark 16:16 teaches baptismal regeneration, and it absolutely does. He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved. Just like we believe Acts 2:38 teaches baptismal regeneration. We just don't think it's for the church.
Yeah.
A lot of that stuff, these signs shall follow them that are saved. But those are apostolic signs that are being given to the apostles. Mark 16 is not the same commission as Matthew 28. If you read them and study them, they're in two different locations, two different areas completely. Jesus is giving the Great Commission in Matthew 28. He is giving the apostolic signs in Mark 16. It's two totally different places.
Yep. That's where people go off, is that, they're taking all these different verses. They take Ephesians 2:8-9, for by grace are you saved through faith, and they'll compare that to, in James, faith without works is dead, or, those in Revelation that have the testimony of Jesus and keep the commandments of God. And they have all this stuff, and there's either three conclusions. You either take the biblical, Bible-believing stance, which is we see both of them, and we say we believe them both, and we rightly divide them, we put them in their proper places, or you've got two other views, which is we can either, one, which a lot of fundamentalists do, we can look at it and we can say, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. It looks like there's a contradiction. Well, there can't be a contradiction. Let's create a system where we can force it all into one thing. Yeah. To where, yes, salvation's by grace through faith without works, but your works prove your salvation. If you were really saved, you wouldn't do all the really bad things, basically, which just translates to you don't do the bad things that, I do.
Lordship. Yeah. It's lordship. Yeah.
Or there's the more honest view, but still an incorrect view, which is that, the Bible has contradictions.
Right.
I actually prefer that view, though, because it's honest. Then you try to look at it and be like, this doesn't make sense in my mind. There can't be contradictions. So let's just shove it into some system I created and then, go for it.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of these modern textual guys, they bring up these, it's like, wow, Mark 16 has some really weird doctrine in it. Well, yeah, if you don't rightly divide, it does. And I think that's one of the tactics of the devil. The devil's almost using their orthodoxy against them, right? Because, the orthodox position of, and we're reformed and, and it all leads to this thing of like, well, if you're reformed and you're orthodox, what do you do with the last 12 verses of Mark? Because it's got some weird stuff in there. But the problem is they don't rightly divide. So I've heard that argument from multiple people. You rightly divide it, and then you don't have to worry, well, it wasn't in there. It wasn't a part of the original. Okay, well, let's look at a few things about the last 12 verses of Mark, okay? Here's what's wild. It's a numbers game, all right? There are 620 known manuscripts of Mark. 620. You know how many of them don't have the last 12 verses?
I'm guessing it's a pretty small number.
Yeah. Try 2.
2.
You get, you'll never guess which 2 they are.
Sinaiticus and Vaticanus.
Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner. Yeah. All right. They're the only 2 that don't have it. Out of all the ones that we have that have the ending, you know what I mean? That have the ending. Only 2 of them don't contain it. Okay. I actually have it in my notes. Here's what the NIV says. Above an NIV, here's what it says. It says the earliest manuscript. And by the way, you're going to talk about the italicized words in the King James Bible. There's some italicized words in the NIV. All right. The last 12 verses of Mark are all in italics in an NIV, at least on the version that I have on my iPad, it is.
I mean, there's going to be italicized words in any translation.
Right.
I mean, because you're translating from one language to the next. You're going to have to put some words in there that make it make sense.
Right. Well, in the NIV, and you can see it here, how it is. It says the earliest manuscripts and some other ancient witnesses do not have verses 9 through 20. So that, I mean, they're casting doubt on it. Like these people do not believe that the last 12 verses of Mark should be in the Bible. Okay. Now, here's what's I love it. This is what I love. Let me get this out of the way. All right. There's something unique about Mark 16, though, in both of these manuscripts, in both of them. And I wish I had a copy of Vaticanus. It is so obvious in Vaticanus. Here's what's interesting about Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. Of course, we have Sinaiticus right here, okay? It's not as pronounced in Sinaiticus as it is in Vaticanus. Sinaiticus here, remember the 3-4 column thing, right? Remember I said that? Okay, help me out here. This thing is a workout to try to, hold on, there we go. Okay. If you notice here, you have a whole column. So what these books would do, and Vaticanus says it as well, is wherever a book ends, they leave the rest of that column blank, and then they start on the next column. So this is Mark. This right here would be Luke, okay? Now, with Sinaiticus, it's subtle. Because, here, lean this back just a touch. There we go. It's subtle because you don't have a huge gap. And when you see it on Vaticanus, you'll see it, okay? But here's what's interesting about Sinaiticus. Whoever is doing Sinaiticus sandbags, and I don't have the exact numbers. You can look them up. They're in Bill Grady's book. They're in a lot of different books. And this is just the facts. If you notice the spacing between the letters here and the spacing between the lines, it is a noticeable difference when they start in with this. And it's actually so astronomical that this should be somewhere around in here.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Which means that rest of that would have been left blank, and you'd have had all this column here. There is somebody was sandbagging with the spacing and because these things are very precise. They write down. These unseals are very precise. The columns and how they do them. Okay, there was plenty of room to put 12 verses here, and somebody was intentionally spacing out. You can even see it from here, like to here. They were spacing out the lettering when they were getting into Mark 16. All right, now. In Vaticanus, which I wish I had a copy of, in Vaticanus, it's like so obvious.
It's even more obvious, yeah.
So, all right, so let me give you an example here. So, people on the screen will be seeing this. They'll be seeing this from the presentation, but I'll show you this here. This is what Matthew looks like. Okay, so this is what Matthew looks like. It's the same as in Codex Sinaiticus, except it's 3 columns.
So I'm looking at Vaticanus.
You're looking at Vaticanus right now. This is 3 columns. Matthew ends, Mark begins. See that there? So wherever they're at, they leave the rest of that column blank, and then the next book begins. All right? Here you have John. This is where it ends, where it begins. Okay? Leave the rest of the column blank. All right? Luke. This is where it ends. This is where it begins. Every single place in Sinaiticus where a book ends and a new one begins, every place in it. Wherever they're at in the column, they leave the rest of that column blank, and the very next column, they start the next book. Am I making sense?
Yeah, I'm following you.
Every place. That's Mark. That's Mark 16.
You got a whole half column just about.
You have half of it. Yeah. So maybe 3/4 of a column there blank. So where should Luke start?
Luke should start right at the top of that
Right
column.
there. And guess what's there? Nothing. Nothing is there. It literally starts on the next page. Luke starts on the next page. An entire column is left completely blank. I mean, and that is the only place in Vaticanus that does that. The only place. And then you got Sinaiticus, and I wish I remember the numbers. It's like there's spaced so many centimeters or millimeters, something like that, and it's like, and like where even the modern scholars like, we don't know why these are spaced so much. Somebody can look that up. But you have the sandbagging in Sinaiticus, and then you have and Vaticanus wasn't even hiding it. They're just like, yeah, just leave the whole column blank. Why would they do that? Out of 700, out of 759 pages, Mark 16 is the only book in all of Vaticanus have an entire column blank after its ending. Dean Burgon said this about the missing. He said it in this book here, the last 12 verses of Mark. He said the older manuscript from which Codex B was copied must have infallibly contained the 12 verses in dispute. The copyist was instructed to leave a blank space in memoriam rei, however you say that, R-E-I. Never was blank. This is what I love. This is almost poetic. Never was blank more intelligible. Never was silence more eloquent. So Dean Burgon is saying that it was infallible. Like whoever's copying this from whatever manuscript Vaticanus was being copied from would have had the last 12 verses. Why would he leave it blank? Sinaiticus also admits and all that kind of stuff. All right, actually, you know what? Here I have it. I actually have the numbers right here, I think. Dean Burgon wrote about, so we just looked at this in Sinaiticus. He said Dean Burgon said this about Sinaiticus, but the writing of these 6 columns is so spread out that they contain less matter than they ought. Okay? So that's what Dean Burgon said. All right, now the question is why were these verses left out? We talked about the fact that there's a lot of doctrine in there that a lot of people can't explain, but that gives these signs of an apostle. It gives these apostolic signs. Well, guess what the Roman Catholic Church claims to have?
Yeah, the apostolic signs.
Apostolic authority. Well, guess what a pope can't do? Any of the 5 apostolic signs. So maybe they wanted it to be left out so they didn't see, And here's also another reason. I think that it was left out, number one, because there was... they didn't like that doctrine. They didn't want to be called as a fraud. Apostolic succession, where the apostles, we have the keys of the kingdom. Okay, well, then why can't you do the things found in Mark 16? Also, though, according to scholars, guess which gospel was written first?
Mark.
There you go. We have a winner. Mark. Now, there's some debate whether it was Mark or whether it was Matthew, whatever. But according to scholars, the common belief is Mark. Well, so guess what? If we take away the last 12 verses in Mark, guess what we take away? The resurrection.
Yeah.
So, and they say, scholars say, now whether they're right, whether they're wrong, doesn't really make sense, or doesn't really make a difference in the argument. Whether they're right or wrong, Mark was the gospel that they say all the other gospel writers used to reference and write their gospels, especially like Matthew and Luke, right? The synoptic gospels.
Yeah, Matthew, Mark, and Luke being very, very similar.
Yeah. So if you take away the resurrection from the quote-unquote original gospel, well, the original gospel doesn't even have the resurrection. Okay. You see the slope that it goes down.
Question all of it.
Exactly. Now here's the last thing with Vaticanus. This is where it gets so wild, and I love this part. There are these things in Vaticanus called umlauts. You ever heard of umlauts?
No.
Okay. Umlauts are these dots. They're 2 dots. They look like this. See those 2 dots above the...
Okay, yeah, I have seen that before.
Okay. In 1995, a man by the name of Philip Payne, discovered that Codex B contained 765 markings known as umlauts. They're also known as distagmi, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Sometimes my North Carolina accent doesn't do well with these,
with these Greek terms,
these different terms, distagmi, all right? They were identified to be textual markers. They were markers to identify textual variants in Vaticanus, okay? Major examples of these are, boom, like you said earlier, John 7:52. The last couple of verses of John 7, all the way through with the woman caught in adultery.
Yeah, John 8, 1 through 11.
Yeah.
John.
Those are not found in Vaticanus. But guess what is right there beside John 7:52?
Those two little dots.
Those two little dots. Hebrews 9:14. Remember how I told you that the rest from Hebrews 9:15 all the way to the end was in different things? Well, guess what's right beside Hebrews 9:14 in Vaticanus?
Those two little
Two little dots. The Johannine comma, one of the most
I actually wanted to get into that.
controversial.
Yeah,
one of the most
John 5, 7. The
Absolutely.
best verse we have on the Trinity.
Well, guess what? It's not in Vaticanus. But guess what? We have right beside of it.
Those two little dots.
Two little dots. So even Dr. Ruttman said that the Johannine comma was one of the most, controversial variants. Of course, we find a lot of Latin for it, right? But there's not a lot of
Greek.
There's not a lot of Greek
but
for it.
I got some notes here. Manuscript P61 and 629 both have the Johannine comment, and manuscript P88 does have it in the margin. And of course, you had many church fathers that quoted it: Tertullian 200 AD, Cyprian 250 AD, Athanasius 350 AD, Jerome 400 to 450 AD, and the Council of Carthage does mention it in 415 AD.
And this is what I tell people. People say, "Oh, well, the Greek evidence is so lacking." Of course, there's the story, whether or not it's a true story or not. There's debate. Erasmus said, "If you can find me one Greek text, I'll put it in there." Da, da, da. Whatever. It's not in Erasmus's 1516 edition.
No, and
consequentially, it's not in several of the English translations before the King James, and it's not in Martin Luther's text either. 1 John 5:7 is not there as it is in our King James Bible. Okay, now. That being said, though, people say, well, you're appealing to Latin witnesses. Well, I think it's interesting. What are the three languages that gave reference to Jesus as the king when he's hanging on the cross?
Yeah.
Greek, Hebrew,
and Latin.
Yep. I mean, that's an interesting thing. Anyway, you also have 1 Corinthians 14, verses 34 and 35, talking about women learning in silence and all that, and referencing speaking in tongues, and women aren't allowed to speak. Well, guess what? Those aren't in the Vaticanus either, which a lot of people like that. A lot of
do.
Yeah, but guess what's beside those verses?
Those two little dots.
Those two little dots. So we're seeing a thing here. All right, this is what's above NIV in John 8 verses 1 through 11, the earliest manuscripts, because it's technically verse 53 of chapter 7 too. Okay, the earliest manuscripts and many other ancient witnesses do not have those references. Okay, and so it's, there's a lot of things. This is John 7:52. We can see the two dots right there. All right, you can see Hebrews amidst all that. You can see the two dots there with Hebrews 9:18 and 19. You can see 1 John 5:7 right there. There's actually three dots there. And the only known variant, and here's what's wild. Here is what's wild. They say, okay, well, these dots, what do these dots mean? Well, they can't really mean of anything else besides textual variants. And here's the thing about Vaticanus, and I didn't get into this earlier, and we'll just go over it really quick. Vaticanus was originally written with, the color of inks is going to evade me. I think the original color was an apricot-colored ink, like an apricot shade. And then it was traced back over in probably the 12th or 13th century with like a dark brown ink, okay? And some of the places were not traced back over. Some of them were left in the original apricot. But what's wild is we can actually look, microscopes and looking at the light, shine the light behind it. And we can actually see where a lot of these umlauts, there's an outer ring of apricot-toned ink where these umlauts were part of the original manuscript and somebody just traced back over them. So these are not like something that was added later. Whoever's making Vaticanus knows about these textual variants. And here's the thing, 1 John 5:7, the only known variant in 1 John 5:7, the Johannine comma, is what we find in the King James, that reading. That's the only known variant. Yep. So guess what the writer of Vaticanus is saying there with those two umlauts? Hey, there's another reading that already exists that backs up our King James Bible. Of course, they didn't know that. Whenever, if it was done in the 14th century or it was done in the 4th century, they wouldn't have known about the King James Bible, haven't made yet. But it just goes to show you the Johannine comma, whoever did Vaticanus knew about it. So why are we basing our manuscripts off of you know what I mean? Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Exactly. And of course, you had church fathers who were referencing it in their letters, non-contemporaries who all knew about it.
Right.
So where did they get that from?
Exactly.
And I mean, to me, it's just common sense. And people say, oh, well, there's other verses in the Trinity or on the Trinity in the Bible. And yes, that's true. But name me one verse that's stronger on the Trinity than 1 John 5:7. There are three that bear record in heaven.
No.
There is none.
And if I was the devil, I'd want to get that verse out of there.
Of course you would, yeah. What spirit's behind the removal of that verse?
Yeah.
Nobody can look me honestly in the eye and tell me, oh, well, I'm sure God's behind that.
Right.
No.
Philip Payne, the guy that put together that, and he wrote an article. It's a really good article. You can we passed them out at our Kingdom Bible Conference. You can look it up. Philip Payne, Payne. But he was a Vatican researcher. Like this is not like this isn't like a guy that's like a Gail Riplinger follower. This is like a Vatican scholar. He is probably not even saved. Okay. But he said when he wrote this article about these umlauts, he said manuscripts containing the variants noted by umlauts were probably in the library of the scriptorium where the codex was written. I don't think people realize how heavy of a statement that is.
Yeah. Say it again, one more time.
This is Philip Payne. He said manuscripts containing the variants noted by umlauts were probably in the library of the scriptorium where the codex was written. So this guy, this Vatican researcher, is just saying, wherever Vaticanus was written, whoever wrote it, wherever it was written, they would have known about these variant readings that are marked by these umlauts. And guess what? The variant readings are the ones that back up our line of manuscripts. All right, Philip Payne also said these umlauts demonstrate both that the scribe was aware of these variant readings and that he or she regarded them as sufficiently important to note.
That's good. I like that.
So here's the conclusion. Out of all that, I know this has kind of been a little bit longer of a podcast, but I've liked
No, you're good. I've enjoyed every second of it.
Yeah. So here's the only two conclusions that we draw. Here's the only two that we can draw. Number one, the textual variants supporting the King James are just as old, if not older, than Vaticanus, because they would have to be older, right? Because whoever's writing Vaticanus knows about these variants that already exist. So if Vaticanus is from the 4th century, and I don't think it is.
Yeah. Well, just for the sake of the argument.
But for sake of the argument, let's say it is. Then you have readings backing what we have before that.
You have alternate readings that trace back before, at the very least, 400 AD.
Right. All right. C.J. Ellicott, who was a member of the revision committee, all right, he said the first ancestor of the received text was at least contemporary of our extant manuscripts, if not older than any one of them. That's what he said. All right. Now here's the other option. And this is the one I think probably is just true. The Vaticanus is a much later manuscript than has been previously believed. I think, and it's interesting. There's a clip, and it's all over the internet, but I think I even have it on my YouTube channel. But there's this guy at the British Library, and he's got Vaticanus, and he was like, the Vaticanus looks, for all intents and purposes, it looks just like a 14th century manuscript document. He might have said more than he realized there.
Yeah.
Now, here's what I'll leave you with. Vaticanus right here. And I forget where this is. I think it's in Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 9, I think, somewhere right around in there when the second part is missing. I think it's there, but I could be wrong. I don't know where it's at. But there's a note in Vaticanus. We'll clarify this in the picture. There's a note from Vatican. It's in the middle margin. Somebody wrote it down. And it says, "Fool and knave, leave the old reading alone and do not change it." That's in the Vaticanus, in the actual manuscript. Somebody wrote it later. And I think that's a very tall tale sign about what we should do with those manuscripts. Leave the old reading alone and do not change it.
For sure. Let me get into one more thing here real quickly. The Greek Septuagint. I read a reference somewhere. I'm not entirely sure if this is accurate. I'm going to run it by you. I heard somewhere that no one has ever found a verse or manuscript from a Greek Old Testament written before the time of Christ. Is that true? That there's never been found a manuscript or a single verse from any Greek Old Testament manuscript written before the time of Christ.
No, I don't think that's accurate.
You don't think that's accurate?
No, you have the Ryland Papyrus, number 458, so P458, is the most well-known evidence we have for pre-Christian Septuagint. It's like Deuteronomy chapters 26 through 28.
Okay, I did hear that there was portions of Deuteronomy.
Yeah,
yes,
it's
that
just,
was.
you can see it's just fragments.
But just fragments. But there's no complete.
No. And we in the Dead Sea Scrolls, there were fewer than 20 fragments of Greek biblical text in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there is some evidence that there were. So okay, here's what I tell people: is there evidence that there were portions of the Old Testament put in Greek? Yes. Is there any evidence that there was an official translation that was widely circulated? No.
No. So the Greek Septuagint is a myth then.
Oh yes, the Greek Septuagint is like saying the Texas Receptus.
Mm-hmm.
There is no the Texas Receptus. There's a whole bunch of them, and it's the same with Septuagint. And we'll go down the rabbit hole on that. Like we'll be here until 3 o'clock.
Till 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going all day with that.
Yeah, that's a whole nother podcast, which I'd love to do with you one day, maybe.
Yeah.
So,
we can get into the Septuagint next time. I'm down for that.
Yeah, I have a whole. You can see I have a whole presentation on the Septuagint. I have 51 slides on the Septuagint that I did for our King James Bible Conference.
Yeah. In the meantime, though, if you want any more information on the mythological Greek Septuagint, then get Dr. Ruckman's book by the same name, The Mythological Greek Septuagint.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Just in closing here, wrapping this thing up, I know we've been going a while. If you have an ESV, an ASV, RSV, then you have a Roman Bible. And all roads lead to Rome. And that's another reason why I'm covering this on this channel, which is End Times Enlightened, which mainly we cover stuff that has to do with end times prophecy. But I feel like this is important.
Yes.
Because all these Roman Catholic Bibles are supporting the Roman Catholic Church, and it's all going to go back to that.
Oh.
If you believe Daniel chapter 2, that Rome is the Iron Kingdom.
Yeah.
Which I do. So, and I know there's different views on that, but I believe that the Roman Catholic Church is Mystery Babylon. At the very least, in this church age, it's Mystery Babylon. And this is what it does. I got one verse I want to close out here with. This is Daniel 11:38. They translate, this is talking about the Antichrist. The Greek Septuagint says God of fortresses, and the King James says God of forces. It's talking about who the Antichrist will honor. And in the Greek Septuagint, it's a lowercase g, God of fortresses. And if you look at most commentators and most scholars and what they have to say in reference to this verse, it's that the Antichrist will most likely be atheistic and a materialist. And the God of fortresses is a reference to himself, where he's a God of military might and all that stuff. And you lose the reference to the capital G, God of forces, who the Antichrist is actually going to worship, which is the dragon. Revelation chapter 12. Who gives him authority, his power, his seat. It's the dragon. And just like Jesus Christ, who's the mystery of godliness, and though he was God, he pointed what? Worship towards God the Father. So also will the Antichrist, as the mystery of iniquity, be pointing worship not to a God of fortresses and military might, but to the dragon, which is really what he's all about, because that's who he is. Revelation chapter 12. So, closing out with that. Guys, thank you for joining us. It's been fun. I appreciate you coming on, Brother Sluder, and hosting me over here. It's been awesome, and hopefully we'll be able to do it again.
Absolutely.